Okay, let's start. Fine. So last I think we have seen about generic servlet. Fine. So what we have seen so far is something like this. If we look at the generic servlet, fine, we have the class called generic servlet, which implements the servlet interface, and so that's one of the interfaces, and the servlet config interface. Fine. We know the methods here. There are 5 methods of servlet. Fine. The service method has not been implemented, so that's abstract. Fine. So generic servlet is an abstract class. Okay. So idea here, whenever you want to develop a servlet, you need not be implementing the servlet interface. 5 methods there. Fine. Okay. For example, the method like get servlet config. Oh, that should always be the same, returning the servlet config object. Fine. So your implementation must always be storing the object of servlet config. So yes, such things are already done in the generic servlet. Okay, fine. And plus the servlet config, those methods, they become convenient methods for a servlet developer. Fine. So if you want to develop a servlet, instead of implementing the servlet interface, you can go by creating a subclass of the generic servlet. Fine. This is what we know. Fine. Clear? Methods, fine. Just recollect what are the methods. Servlet config. Methods in servlet config here, because those are all implemented here. What are all those methods? Methods are get servlet name, get init parameter names, and getting the servlet context. Okay, fine. Servlet methods, the init method with servlet config. Fine. And then what has been introduced is one more init method without parameter. Fine. So their initialization specific to this servlet can be done. Fine. Then destroy method, not doing anything in the implementation of, in the generic servlet, it's been implemented not to do anything. Fine. Then get servlet config, get servlet info. Yeah. Service method is still abstract here. Okay. Fine. And yeah, what has been done is, in the servlet context, we have method for writing into the log of the container. Okay, so that method has been added in generic servlet as a convenience method. Okay, fine. Now whatever we have seen so far, this all is part of Java x.servlet package. Fine. In this we had the service method which was using interfaces, servlet request, and servlet response. Okay, so this is all very general. Fine, it's not specific to the HTTP protocol. Fine, it's general. Any protocol may be there. Fine, which is based on a request response paradigm. Fine, you should be able to have a servlet. And you should be able to write a servlet. Implementation of that should be available. Provided, yes, you need a lot of help from the container, in the sense that container is the one who will actually be responsible for the communication, fine, for receiving a request, converting into the Java objects. Fine. Now all these containers also implement one more, there is one more package, fine, where we have a lot of other implementations which the container has to do. So yeah, we have this other package which is Java x.servlet.http, and we have the package called Java x.servlet.http. Okay, when the request would come to the container, fine, since the request received is an HTTP request, fine, it is a specific protocol, fine. What we have here is, we have from servlet request a sub interface. So all the functionality which is generally available, yes, whatever the protocol is responsible for exchanging content, and therefore it would have methods for reading the buffer. So we have the methods like get reader, get input stream. Fine. We have methods for parameters. Request can have parameters. Fine. On request, you should be able to, in a request, you should be able to store some attributes. Fine. Fine. Managing attributes. We have methods for uh, getting the information related to the connection itself. Fine. TCP/IP. Okay. So all those things are available in general, but there's nothing specific to HTTP. When we start looking at HTTP, fine. So we have, what we have got here is, in this package javax.servlet.http, we got an interface called HTTP servlet request. So in the container, since the protocol is HTTP, okay, when the request is received, it's not creating object of some class which implements just the servlet request only. What is created is an object of some class which implements HTTP servlet request. The entire information which is coming is about HTTP protocol. Fine. So information related specific to HTTP protocol is the additional thing which is added to the servlet request. Okay. Same way for response also. So we got this interface called HTTP servlet request, which extends from servlet request. Similarly, we also have another one called HTTP servlet response, which is extending from servlet response. So these are having, these are nothing but additional functionality which make it specific to HTTP. Fine. So what is actually being created are objects of HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. Okay. And then further, one more thing, one more class what we have here. Okay, like we have the generic servlet class, which is abstract. What has further been done is, yes, we have a subclass of the generic servlet, which is known as HTTP servlet. So we have HTTP servlet class as a subclass of the generic servlet. And this is again part of javax.servlet.http. And so three important things which are part of javax.servlet.http. One is the HTTP servlet, which is extending from the generic servlet. So when we are writing a servlet, fine, yes, we have one option, implement the servlet interface and override the 5 methods. Another option, extend from generic servlet. You'll have to override service method plus any other method. If you like, you can override. Fine. Fine. You may like to override the get servlet info. Okay. So any other method, fine. But yes, service method. But there the service method, what were the parameters? Servlet request and servlet response. Now what we have? Another option is you have a class called HTTP servlet. Fine. So let's have a look at what are all these three things. Okay. The HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response, and the HTTP servlet. Okay. So to look at this HTTP servlet request, starting with this one. Let's start with this one. Okay. Yeah. So what do we have in HTTP servlet? Yeah. So if you look at HTTP, find the HTTP specific things. So starting with HTTP servlet request. So for this, let's try to recollect the format of the HTTP request. What do we find in the format of HTTP request? What's all the information there? The first thing is a request line. The first field there is a method. Fine, get or post or something. Fine. So in HTTP servlet request, we have a method called get method. Get method to return a string. Fine. Method is nothing but it is specific to HTTP. Fine. Second field, resource, we already have method. Fine. Since it is based on URL, fine, it's based on URL. URL is not specific only to HTTP. Okay, fine. Resource is part of the URL. So that information, whatever the protocol may be, fine, that was part of our servlet request already. Fine. So we're just trying to capture all the things which we get in a request. Fine. So in request, you'll have a method. In request, you'll have the resource. We already have the method coming from servlet request. Then protocol version, we have a method called get protocol. Fine, we have the method get protocol in servlet request already. Fine, then what are the next thing? Headers. This is very specific to HTTP. Okay, so to get the headers, fine, there will be several headers. Headers are of the form header name, colon, the value part. Okay, fine. So what we have, you might like to get all the header names. What are all the headers? So we can get enumeration of a string. Yeah, very standard things, right? Get header names. You can get all the header names. Fine. Then getting all the header names. Yeah, then getting, you will like to get the specific header, the value corresponding to a specific header. So method is get header, parameter is a string, the header name, and you get a string which is a header. Okay, fine. Some headers may be something like, you have a header like content length. Fine. What would be content length? A numeric value. And you'll have to have it converted to an int. When you won't keep it as a string, right? The return type would be a string. See, when I say get header, if I give a header name, return type is a string. So if I want to use it, right, I'll have to use it by using a parseInt method when converting to int. So if you got some parameters, I've just taken an example of content length. Any parameter where we know it's going to be integer type, the values are of integer type. Fine. You can use a convenient method here called get int header. Fine. Parameter, header name, but the return type becomes int. Fine. Okay, convenience. When you don't have to do parse separately. Fine. Okay. Similarly, you do have fields like in our HTTP protocol, it is allowed to have a header. We might have a header which says last modified or if modified since. Yeah, in the request, you can have a header called if modified since. What would be there? It would be some date time. What format of date time? Oh, according to the protocol, there are 3 different formats which are allowed. Fine. So if you use the get header method, you'll get it as a string, and then you'll have to figure out which particular format it is, and then you'll be able to get to the date value. A lot of work there. Okay, over here we just have a convenient method called get date header. Takes the header name and returns long. Time in milliseconds. Fine, so convenient method. Yeah, it's same as get header, but also doing some additional thing like parsing the things for me, parsing a date here. Okay, so you got methods related to headers, parsing any of the headers. Fine. Now, what we also have is we have specific header names which are very commonly used. So for such headers, you need not be going into asking for the header by its name. You have methods specific for that header itself. Oh, you would not like to going for, oh, what are the cookies? Get me the header for cookie. In cookie, there is a specific format in which the a multiple cookies would be stored. Okay, you'll have a header called cookie colon, and then there is a specific format which is specific to how cookies will have to be communicated. Okay, and there'll be multiple cookies there. Fine. So instead of using that get a header, asking for a cookie header, and then parsing the value part, we have convenient things here. What we also have here is we actually have a class called cookie, and we have a method called get cookies to return an array of cookie. Yeah, we have a class called cookie here. Okay, so what are the cookies which have been received from the client, the browser? Okay, as part of the request. It's a HTTP request. So this is again fine. So instead of looking for a specific header and then doing the parsing on our own, we got a convenient method straight away specific to the kind of header called cookie. Okay. In same way, we have the as mentioned, we have content type, content length. If there is content in the request, fine, you might have content type, content length. We have methods straight away for getting the content type and content. I think those methods are already inherited from servlet request, content type, content length. Fine. Here you will also find headers. Fine, you do have headers for them. Okay. Fine. So those fine, those are anyway inherited. Content type, content length. Fine. Get cookies. Yeah. There is this class called cookie, again part of javax.servlet .http package, and this is a class called cookie. Fine. Okay, fine. You have headers. What are the headers we can have? Yeah. Content type, content length, those methods are inherited from servlet request. Okay, fine. You have headers which are related to authentication. Fine. The user on the client side may have been authenticated. How was he authenticated? Fine. On the client side, if the authentication has been done, so we have method like get auth type, the type of authentication. it returns a string. Fine. What type of authentication was done? Fine. It's a plain authentication. It's a message digest authentication. Fine. Or it is based on the digital signature. Fine. How the authentication was done? Fine. So what is the auth type that can be found from the request? Okay. Fine. And if he's been authenticated, then the information about the user is known. Okay. So you could ask for, we have the method called get remote user to return a string. And getting the remote user. Okay. Or there are methods which are specific to the security package which we have Java. We have java.security package in the Java API. Fine. Where if a fine if authentication has been done, you could even use a method called get user principal. Fine. Get principal or get user principal. I think it is get principal. Returns object of type principal. Principal is in java.security package. This is part of java.security. I think method name is get user principal probably. Yeah, it's get user principal. And just check that. Fine. If the user is known, okay, if authentication has been done, user has been identified. Fine. What is important to us, user name may not be so important to us. Fine. For the server, what is important? Or does he have certain authority or not? Fine. Is he authorized to do certain things? Who is authorized to do certain thing is not identified by the username, but rather by his role. Does he have a certain role? If this user, oh, we have a role called manager. Which are the users who have the manager role, right? So when a user logs in, it would be identified whether that user has a manager role or not. And if he has a manager role, then he might be given certain type of content. Fine. Okay, so you might be interested in knowing whether he has a particular role or not. Fine. So we have method like is user in role. Parameter is a string which is some role name. Fine. Give a role and this returns simply a Boolean value. So you can check if the user has a particular role or not. Fine. These all would work provided he's been authenticated. And only if the user has been authenticated, these things should work. Okay. There are a few other methods. Fine. But these are specific to another thing. See, one thing we know about the HTTP is a stateless protocol. Fine. What do we mean by stateless here? The client makes a connection, sends a request, gets a response, and then they forget each other. Fine. The server doesn't know about this client. Each time a client has to make a new connection. Each time a client is a new client for him. For the server, every request, every connection which comes is a new client. When it's when each thing is independent, but then we want, sometimes we would like to have something to be done over multiple connections. Fine, I'll be connecting multiple times, but then the server should be able to identify that it is a continuation of something which was going on earlier for this user. That means managing identification of the user on the server side may be required sometimes. Right? And this is something which is managed by taking help from cookies at times. Fine? Or there are other mechanisms, fine, like URL rewriting. Fine? Those are the things which may be used on the container side by the container to track or identify a user. Fine? Fine? To keep track of a user. Fine? So all those things require something what we call as a session. Fine. So container can manage session for a client, right? For a remote client. So we have method here called get session. Okay. Okay, I'll just give the default one, which returns object of HTTP session. Yeah, we'll need to be discussing that, and this thing we'll discuss later. Okay, but just remember, yes, this is also a method in the HTTP servlet request. Fine, and fine. Another thing, since it's returning a session, yeah, there is this session which takes Boolean also as a parameter. Fine, Boolean create if required. Fine, create if required. Fine, the default is false. Okay. Sorry, it's true. Yeah, default is true. So by default, if I just say get session, it understands not existing. That means I need to create it. If session is not there, I'll create and give a new session. Fine. Understanding session, that will be in another session. Okay. Okay. Right. A few methods again related to this session itself. Okay. We have method called get requested session ID, I think. Get request get requested session ID to return a string. So HTTP sessions basically maintain an ID, and how the ID is managed, it may be managed through cookies. So we have method like is session. Okay, exact method name will have to be verified. Is session ID from cookie to return a Boolean value, or is session ID from URL. Fine. We have methods to check whether it's through URL rewriting or is it coming through a cookie. And so HTTP servlet request would have methods on these lines. Fine. Other methods we already have inherited from servlet request. Fine. Getting the content part, reading the content if there is content in the request. Fine. Get content type, get content length, get reader, get input stream. And all such methods we already have inherited. Getting the parameters. Fine. If there are parameters, question mark something, query string, those are already inherited. Fine. So I'm not mentioning them again. Okay. Fine. These are nothing but the additional methods. Fine. After you have got the after you inherit. Fine. There's not. I'm not rewriting the methods inherited from servlet request. And the servlet request plus this is specific to HTTP addition taking place because of being specific to HTTP. Okay, so this is our HTTP servlet request. We got HTTP servlet response. Fine, this again extends from the servlet response. Fine, so talking of HTTP specific thing. Fine, getting protocol version. What protocol version according to which this is being done? I think that's getting inherited. Because if you look at the response line, first thing is protocol version. Anyway, the protocol version is something which you may not work with. What's the next field? Next field in the response line. We're looking at the response format now. Status code. Right? So we have the method called get status. Yeah. Actually, here what's being done? We are setting up the response. Okay. So we should be allowed to set the status. Fine. Anyway, we got the method called get status. Do we have that? I think. Okay, what we have here is we have a convenient method. We don't say set the status to this and this. Fine. What we have here is a convenience method where you should be able to say something like this. The method name is slightly misleading or fine. Normally, you don't have to say anything, oh, what status I want to send, because we have a normal status code of 200. Fine. So by default, okay, status 200 is what I would like to send. Okay. But sometimes I might like to give a response of redirection. Whenever you say redirection, you must have a header called location. You don't have to worry about setting up the header called location. Fine. You don't have to worry about what status code should I be setting. You just have a simple method called send redirect. Parameter is a string, a URL, returns void. What does it do? Sets up the status of 301. Fine. The header called location would have this value. What's a new URL where this resource would be available? When you are sending a response saying, oh, it's not here, it's somewhere else. That's why you are saying redirect. And you could redirect to your same application, you could redirect to another application on this machine, you could redirect to any URL. Fine, could be on another server. Okay, so send redirect. Give the URL. Fine. Okay, it would even give the appropriate content for it. Fine. The container would decide. Container is sending the entire response. So container has some format, some default template for a response. Fine. We even have another method called send error with parameter as integer for status and a string for the message. Returns void. Yeah. What is this send error? User defined error. 401, 404. Okay. You know what? There is actually a template for an error page which the container would manage. So there is some content part where a message can be included. That's the second parameter. Message can be included. Fine. What is the status code which goes? You decide. It's not necessarily that you are giving one of those 4xx or 5xx. You may still be giving a 2xx. Method name is send error. Commonly used for sending an error page. Clear? Fine. Whatever you like, you decide the status code. Okay. And you can decide what is the status code you would like. Fine. There is some template page according to which the response will be sent. And in that template page, there is a provision for a message which you are deciding from here. Okay. And that's what is send error. Okay, fine. That first line, but then we have a headers, right? So normally I might like to set up some headers. Fine. In the response, I would be setting up the headers. In request, we are only getting the headers, but now we are setting headers. And one header can have multiple values also. So we got method like, there is get header, but we have method called set header, which takes two parameter, a string for the header name and another string for the header value. Okay, fine. So there's a set header, there's a add header. Fine. For this header name, fine. If there is already some value, fine, don't destroy that. This is additional value, multiple values for the same header. Fine. So set header, add header, fine. And then we have set int header. You know this is convenient method. You have your header name, but second parameter will be a int for the value. Okay, fine. Add int header. And you'll have the set date header. Parameter would be header name and long. And your time in milliseconds. And so int and date. And if those are the type of values which you would like to set in a header, and you have the convenient methods. And formatting would be done by the container. Yeah. Some other commonly used header, set content type. Oh, set content type is already seen from servlet request. But then what about cookie? You want to set up a cookie? Fine. So if you want to set up a cookie, we have the method called add cookie. Parameter is a cookie. Recollect, cookie is a class here. And let me go back there to the request part. Okay, let's go back here. There's one point I wanted to mention. Yeah, when we use the get cookies method, there's something which you have to be careful about here. Okay, if there are no cookies in the request, what do you think? This is not returning an array with 0 elements. The get cookies method is not returning an array with 0 elements. Instead, it returns a null. Okay, normally we have a habit of, okay, if there's some method returning an array, fine, we'll assume it would have, if it doesn't have anything, it would be 0 element array. Okay, but that's not the case with get cookies method. So we always have to do a check for null. Okay, whenever using the get cookies method, always check for null first. Don't forget the null check for this. Okay, need to have a null check. Fine. Whenever we use this, do a null check. Fine. Okay, so fine, that cookie class is there. Fine. So you can create object of cookie using constructor where the name of the cookie and the value of the cookie can be specified. Fine. And then you can set the expiration date for the cookie. Okay, cookie is valid for so much time. Fine. There's the expiration date for the cookie. So that could be set in the cookie class. So there's a cookie class separately. By default, it is 0. I think it expires immediately. Fine. So add cookie. Fine. Adding cookie. And this is a convenient method which we can have there. Clear? Okay. And then, yeah, so mainly headers and convenient method for cookie. Yeah. Send redirect, send error. Those are the other convenient things. What else can be there? We have method called encode URL. We have method to encode URL. It returns a string. Okay, this would be useful for session. Encode URL is going to be useful for session. It encodes get encoded URL. I think it's not encode URL, it's get encoded URL. Fine. Method name can be checked. Fine, it's either get encoded URL, encode URL, something like this. Yeah, give it a string, a URL. Fine. And you can give it a string, a URL, and then for that it should be able to okay. See, when we have URL rewriting used for session, encoding sessions. So how to include the session in a URL rewriting? So any URL, fine, get encoded URL, fine, it will return the actual URL which you should be using, where the rewriting is already done. Okay, session ID rewriting has to be done. So that would be done in this returned URL. So this is, I think it is get encoded URL. Yeah, get encoded URL. E capital. Anyway, check that in the API. Okay, so this is something which you'll have in the HTTP servlet response. And then comes the class called HTTP servlet. Okay, what does HTTP servlet get? It is inheriting from generic servlet. Fine, the methods, fine, we understand those methods from servlet config already available. Additional 2 log methods are available. Okay, we have the service method which was abstract in the generic servlet. So it is abstract in the superclass, but it is implemented here. Okay, fine. How it has been implemented? So we have this method called returns void. We have the method called service. Parameters are servlet request. Okay, and servlet response. And it has a throws for servlet exception, IO exception. There are servlet exception and IO exception, the throws for which is available here. Okay, the way this has been implemented here is it simply does one thing. It says, let me call the service method here. So it is again calling a service method by casting those objects as HTTP servlet request. So request here it says, oh, this is HTTP servlet request, and response is HTTP servlet response. So casting them into this and then invoking the method. So this implementation is how the implementation is done is something like this. So implementation of service method, which we were having in servlet, in the generic servlet. Generic servlet, this was abstract, has been overridden. The way it has been overridden, something like this. So this means this class also has a method, a further service method. So this service method was abstract, has been implemented. But what is the implementation? Okay, calling the other service method. And we have the other service method here. So we have in this class another service method. Okay, so it is again, this method is a protected method. So it's a protected, returns void, name of the method is service, and yes, parameters. Yeah, this is taking as parameter the HTTP servlet request. And second parameter is our HTTP servlet response. With the throws for IO exception, fine. Servlet exception, comma, IO exception. Okay, but this has an implementation again. Okay, the class HTTP servlet is abstract. Doesn't have abstract method though. Okay, it doesn't have abstract method. because you should go for a subclass. You won't be using this object straight away. And you are going to be overriding these methods. Okay. So fine, from container, we know this is the method which it is invoking on any servlet. So that would in turn invoke the method with, it would just simply cast and invoke the method with, which is specific to HTTP now. Okay, what's the implementation of this method? The implementation of this method is saying, oh, I have got the request object, which is HTTP servlet request. So on this, it has this, so it will, from this, it will say, let me check the string. What's the method name? Okay, I'm not giving the exact code here. Fine, it's just the kind of behavior this method has. Okay, it's not an exact code which I'm taking from someplace. Okay, but the kind of thing which is done in this service method is it will first find out what is the method name, find equal to, so it will be from the request dot get method. Fine, recollect HTTP specific. In the HTTP servlet request, we have this method called get method. So it finds out what is the HTTP method, whether it is get or post or something. Okay, and then it has something like this. It says if method name dot equals, or equals ignore case, whatever it might have done. Fine, if it equals get, in that case, if it's get, then let me invoke the method called do get. Parameters, I'll just pass the request and response object. Okay, else if method name equals post, yeah, what should I do? Do post. From here, it's identifying the method and branching to the appropriate do method. So what are the methods here? We have all the do methods also, and they all have an implementation. Now what is the implementation of do get? Let's check the implementation of do get. Fine. So like this, okay? So do get, do post, two parameters. These methods with two parameters, HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. We got the do xxx methods. Fine, additional methods are do xxx method. Let's pick up one do xxx method and see what it is doing. Okay, so one of the methods, these are all protected methods. So we have the protected method returns void. Let's say the method do get. Parameter HTTP servlet request. Okay, you have the request, and second parameter is the response. Now what's being done in this? What's the implementation? The implementation is simple. It says send error. And what's the error? It says get method not supported. Do get says get method not supported. The error is get method not supported. Do post will say post method not supported. What's the idea? The implementation in HTTP servlet for do methods. Do get says get method not supported. Do post says post method not supported. The idea here is you have to go for a subclass and override the method. If you are not overriding, it's not supported. Simple. So whatever you implement, that's becoming supported. Your implementation comes for that. Right? Okay. So what are the options now for writing a servlet? Implement servlet, override the 5 methods, or extend from generic servlet, override the service method, extend from HTTP servlet, override the service method, or you have the option still of overriding service method. Then in that case, no, none of the do methods will be invoked from there. It's whatever you say in service. Or you may not override the service method, let it be, fine. But one of the do methods you may, or any of the do methods, you may like to override them and start supporting them. Fine. So what we have in HTTP servlet, additional, fine, one more service method, all the do methods, okay, and there's one more method here which has been added. We have this method, the content, we have the content and modify. There's a method called to return long. Yeah, the method returns long. Get last modified. Takes parameter as HTTP servlet request. Fine. So from the request, take whatever information you like. See, what is this? This servlet is what? It is a resource. Fine, it's acting as a resource, right? So for any resource, you always have the last modified date time. And if it was a static file, yes, the file has a modification timestamp that becomes the last modified. But for servlet, which is a resource, let the servlet decide some logic. Maybe I'm fetching things from a database, so I might say no. It's each time I'll say okay, that's -1. It's you have to refresh. You don't take any last modified or anything. Okay, but yes, if you have some time which you can provide, okay, definitely it's the last modification for the content which I'm giving is this much. You are generating the content, you can decide the last modified for it. Okay, that's the idea here. Fine. So HTTP servlet inherits from generic servlet, adds those do methods. Fine. One service method and all the do methods. Okay. And we'll continue tomorrow.